The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound as Sarah Martinez adjusted her gear one final time. At 28 years old, she stood 5 feet 6 inches tall with muscles that spoke of countless hours of preparation. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her brown eyes held a determination that had carried her through 18 months of the most grueling military training known to mankind. Today was different. Today, she would attempt something no woman had ever accomplished in the history of the United States Navy SEALs. The Hell Week that had broken men twice her size was behind her. The underwater demolition training that had sent seasoned swimmers to the hospital was a memory. The psychological warfare designed to crack the strongest minds had only made her more focused. Sarah had grown up in a small town in Texas where her father worked as a mechanic and her mother taught elementary school. Money was always tight, but her parents had instilled in her a work ethic that refused to accept limits. When other kids were playing video games, Sarah was climbing trees, building forts, and challenging herself with physical activities that most adults would find difficult. The military had always fascinated her, not the glory or the uniforms, but the precision, the teamwork, and the idea that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when pushed beyond their perceived limits. When she turned 18, Sarah enlisted in the Navy with a single goal in mind. She wanted to become a Navy SEAL. The problem was simple. Women weren't allowed in the SEALs. For decades, this elite fighting force had been exclusively male. The training was considered too intense, the missions too dangerous, and the physical demands too extreme for female candidates. But times were changing, and Sarah had arrived at exactly the right moment in history. Just 2 years before Sarah's application, the Department of Defense had opened all combat roles to women, including the opportunity to attempt Navy SEAL training. The catch was that the standards would not be lowered. Every test, every challenge, every impossible task that had separated the SEALs from ordinary soldiers would remain exactly the same. When Sarah first announced her intention to try out for the SEALs, the reactions were mixed. Some people laughed. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Even well-meaning friends and family members suggested she consider other military specialties that might be more suitable for her gender. Her recruiting officer, a gruff man named Sergeant Peterson, had been particularly blunt during their first meeting. He leaned back in his chair, studied her application, and said, "Miss Martinez, I've seen Marines who couldn't handle what you're asking to do. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer intelligence work or logistics? Those are important jobs too." Sarah had looked him straight in the eye and replied, "Sergeant, I didn't come here for a safe job. I came here to see how far I can push myself." The preliminary testing had been brutal. Physical fitness standards that would challenge professional athletes. Swimming tests in conditions designed to simulate combat scenarios. Mental evaluations that probed every corner of her psychological makeup. Out of the initial group of candidates, only 12% made it to the next phase. Sarah was among them. But surviving the preliminary tests was just the beginning. Basic underwater demolition training, known as BUD/S, was where dreams went to die. The program had a dropout rate of over 70%. Grown men who had dominated their high school and college sports teams found themselves crying, quitting, and walking away in defeat. The training started before dawn every day, mile after mile of running in soft sand that made every step feel like running through quicksand. Ocean swims in water so cold that hypothermia was a constant threat. Obstacle courses that seemed designed by someone who wanted to test the absolute limits of human endurance. Then came the boat cruise. Teams of 6 to 8 candidates who had to work together to carry, lift, and maneuver rubber boats weighing hundreds of pounds. The instructors made it clear that individual performance meant nothing if the team failed. Sarah found herself working alongside men who outweighed her by 50 to 100 pounds. But she quickly learned that technique and determination could often overcome raw strength. The psychological pressure was relentless. Instructors screamed instructions that seemed impossible to follow. They created scenarios where there were no right answers, only opportunities to see how candidates responded under extreme stress. Sleep deprivation became a constant companion. Meals were often cold and eaten in silence while standing at attention. Many nights, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk listening to the sound of her fellow candidates packing their gear. The next morning, their beds would be empty, their dreams of becoming SEALs officially over. Each departure reminded her that she was walking on the edge of her own limits. The first major milestone came during the 4th week of training. It was called Hell Week, and the name was not an exaggeration. For 5.5 days, candidates received a maximum of 4 hours of sleep total. The physical challenges never stopped. Ocean swims, log carries, boat races, and obstacle courses continued around the clock. During Hell Week, Sarah discovered something about herself that she had never fully understood before. When her body wanted to quit, when her muscles screamed in protest, when every rational part of her mind suggested that enough was enough, she found a reserve of mental strength that seemed to have no bottom. On the 3rd day of Hell Week, during a particularly brutal log carry exercise, Sarah watched 3 more candidates ring the bell that signaled their withdrawal from the program. The instructors had positioned the bell prominently in the center of the training area, and its sound had become the soundtrack of broken dreams. Staff Sergeant Williams, the lead instructor, had noticed her watching the departing candidates. He walked over and stood beside her while she continued her push-ups in the sand. "Martinez," he said quietly, "you thinking about ringing that bell?" Sarah continued her exercise without breaking rhythm. "No, Staff Sergeant. Why not? You've proven your point. Nobody would blame you." She paused her push-ups and looked up at him. Sand covered her face, and exhaustion was written in every line of her body, but her voice was steady. "Because I didn't come here to prove a point, Staff Sergeant. I came here to become a SEAL." Williams studied her for a long moment, then nodded and walked away. Later, she would learn that this conversation had been a test, another opportunity for the instructors to gauge her mental resilience. The physical challenges of Hell Week were matched by psychological warfare designed to break even the strongest candidates. Instructors would single out individuals for special attention, creating scenarios where success seemed impossible and failure appeared inevitable. They questioned candidates' motivations, their abilities, and their right to be there. Sarah received her share of this treatment, but she also faced additional challenges that her male counterparts didn't experience. Comments about women in combat roles. Suggestions that she was taking a spot away from a more deserving male candidate. Questions about her physical capabilities that went beyond the standard harassment all candidates received. Through it all, she maintained her focus on the only thing that mattered, completing each task to the best of her ability and moving on to the next challenge. She had learned early in training that dwelling on unfairness or focusing on obstacles beyond her control was a luxury she couldn't afford. The breakthrough moment came during a night navigation exercise in the mountains surrounding the training facility. Teams of candidates had to find their way through difficult terrain using only basic equipment and their training. The route was designed to be completed just before dawn, leaving no margin for error. Sarah's team had become lost in a canyon system that all looked identical in the darkness. 2 of her teammates were showing signs of panic, and the group's pace had slowed to a crawl. With only 2 hours until the deadline, it appeared they would fail the exercise. Instead of accepting defeat, Sarah took charge. Using techniques she had learned during land navigation training, she identified their location and plotted a route that would get them to the finish line with minutes to spare. More importantly, she managed to keep her team calm and focused when everything seemed hopeless. When they crossed the finish line, their instructor was waiting with a smile that was equal parts surprise and respect. Later, Sarah would learn that this exercise had a 30% failure rate, and teams that failed were often dismissed from the program entirely. The success in the mountains marked a turning point in how she was perceived by both instructors and fellow candidates. The woman who had started training as an outsider trying to prove herself had become a valued team member whose skills and determination were recognized by everyone around her. But even as she gained acceptance and respect, Sarah knew that the greatest challenges still lay ahead. The specialized training that would teach her to become a true Navy SEAL was about to begin, and nothing she had experienced so far would prepare her for what was coming next. The specialized training phase brought new challenges that tested Sarah in ways she had never imagined. The basic survival skills and physical conditioning of the earlier months gave way to advanced combat techniques, specialized weapons training, and scenarios that simulated real-world military operations. Sarah found herself learning to operate in environments that ranged from desert warfare to Arctic survival. Each new skill set required complete mastery before moving on to the next level. The instructors made it clear that in actual combat situations, there would be no second chances for mistakes. The diving training pushed her to limits she didn't know existed. Navy SEALs were expected to operate underwater for extended periods using equipment that could fail at any moment. The training scenarios included simulated equipment failures, underwater navigation in zero visibility conditions, and emergency procedures that had to be executed perfectly while holding her breath. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah and her dive partner were tasked with locating and disarming a simulated underwater explosive device. The water was murky, visibility was less than 2 feet, and they had to complete the mission while breathing from a single air tank that contained barely enough oxygen for one person. Halfway through the exercise, her partner's equipment malfunctioned. In a real-world scenario, this could have meant death for both of them. Sarah had to make split-second decisions about whether to abort the mission or find a way to complete it while keeping both of them alive. She chose to continue. Using hand signals they had practiced hundreds of times, she communicated a modified plan to her partner. They would share her air supply while she completed the technical aspects of the mission. It required precise timing, absolute trust, and flawless execution of techniques they had drilled until they became second nature. When they surfaced successfully with the mission completed, their instructor was waiting with an expression that mixed approval with surprise. Later, she learned that most teams chose to abort when faced with similar equipment failures. Her decision to adapt and continue had demonstrated the kind of thinking that separated SEALs from ordinary soldiers. The weapons training introduced Sarah to firearms and explosives that were far beyond anything she had encountered in basic military training. Precision shooting at distances that required mathematical calculations. Close-quarters combat with weapons she had to learn to field strip and reassemble blindfolded. Explosives training that involved working with materials capable of leveling buildings. But the most challenging aspect of this phase wasn't the technical skills. It was learning to think like a SEAL in combat situations where the rules were constantly changing and survival depended on quick thinking and adaptability. The training scenarios became increasingly complex and realistic. Sarah found herself dropped into mock enemy territory with minimal equipment and tasked with completing missions that seemed impossible. Sometimes she worked alone. Other times she was part of a small team where failure by any individual could compromise everyone's safety. One exercise that would stay with her forever took place in a facility designed to simulate urban warfare. The building was a maze of corridors, rooms, and obstacles that could hide enemy combatants around every corner. Sarah and 3 teammates had to clear the entire structure while rescue hostages and neutralize threats. The scenario was designed to be completed in daylight with full visibility, but their instructors had modified the rules at the last minute. They would have to complete the mission in complete darkness using only night vision equipment that made everything appear in shades of green and gray. As they moved through the building, Sarah took point position, leading the team through corridors where every shadow could hide a threat. The night vision equipment provided visibility, but also created blind spots and depth perception issues that made every step dangerous. 20 minutes into the mission, they encountered their first hostile. A role-playing instructor armed with simulated weapons appeared from behind a doorway and engaged them in combat. Sarah's training took over, and she responded with speed and precision that surprised even her teammates. But the real test came when they reached the room where the hostages were supposedly being held. Intelligence reports had indicated 2 captives guarded by 3 enemies. When Sarah's team breached the room, they found a completely different scenario. There were 4 hostages, 5 guards, and a complex layout that made their planned approach impossible. Worse, one of the hostages appeared to be injured and would require immediate medical attention. Sarah had to make decisions about tactics, prioritize objectives, and coordinate her team's response in seconds. She signaled for her teammates to take positions that would give them maximum coverage while she developed a modified plan. Instead of the straightforward assault they had rehearsed, she coordinated a complex maneuver that neutralized the threats while minimizing risk to the hostages. The exercise concluded successfully, but Sarah learned later that the scenario had been deliberately changed to test how teams responded when their careful planning became useless. Most teams struggled with the adaptation. Sarah's team had not only adapted but had improved upon their original mission parameters. As the specialized training continued, Sarah began to understand what separated Navy SEALs from other elite military units. It wasn't just the physical conditioning or the technical skills, though both were essential. It was the ability to remain calm and effective when everything went wrong, when plans fell apart, and when success seemed impossible. The psychological training intensified during this phase. Sarah found herself in scenarios designed to test her response to capture, interrogation, and torture. The training was carefully controlled, but the mental and emotional stress was real. She had to learn techniques for maintaining mission security and personal integrity under conditions that were designed to break her will. During one exercise, she spent 3 days in a simulated prisoner of war camp where instructors used every legal technique to extract information from her. Sleep deprivation, isolation, psychological manipulation, and physical discomfort were all part of the training designed to prepare SEALs for the worst-case scenarios they might face in combat. Sarah discovered that her mental preparation was just as important as her physical conditioning. The meditation and visualization techniques she had learned helped her maintain focus when her captors tried to break her concentration. The sense of purpose that had driven her to attempt SEAL training gave her strength when everything else seemed hopeless. When the exercise ended, Sarah had successfully protected all classified information and maintained her composure under extreme stress. Her instructors noted that she had performed as well as any candidate they had trained, male or female. The leadership training challenged Sarah in different ways. SEALs were expected to lead teams in combat situations where traditional military hierarchy might not apply. She had to learn to make decisions quickly, communicate effectively under stress, and inspire confidence in teammates who might initially doubt her capabilities. During a week-long field exercise, Sarah was assigned to lead a team of 4 male candidates through a series of missions that tested every skill they had learned. The scenario involved infiltrating enemy territory, gathering intelligence, and extracting safely while avoiding detection. The challenge wasn't just completing the missions. Sarah had to prove her leadership capabilities to teammates who had never taken orders from a female combat soldier. Some were supportive from the beginning. Others were skeptical and needed to see evidence of her capabilities before accepting her authority. Sarah approached the challenge by focusing on competence rather than trying to prove her worthiness. She demonstrated thorough knowledge of tactics and strategy. She made decisions based on careful analysis of available information. Most importantly, she took responsibility for both successes and failures without making excuses or shifting blame. By the 3rd day of the exercise, her team was functioning as a cohesive unit with complete trust in her leadership. They had successfully completed 2 complex missions and were preparing for their final challenge when everything changed. Intelligence reports indicated that one of their previous missions had been compromised. Enemy forces were actively searching for them, and their planned extraction point was no longer safe. Sarah had to develop a new plan that would get her team out safely while completing their primary objective. The modified plan required splitting the team and executing a complex maneuver that involved multiple diversions and a rendezvous at a secondary location. Each team member had to execute their part perfectly while maintaining communication discipline that would prevent enemy forces from tracking their radio signals. Sarah took the most dangerous assignment for herself, serving as a decoy to draw enemy attention away from her teammates while they completed the intelligence-gathering mission. For 6 hours, she moved through enemy territory alone, using every stealth technique she had learned to avoid capture while creating enough disturbance to keep enemy forces focused on her location. The extraction was successful, and the mission was completed without compromise. When the exercise ended, Sarah's teammates made it clear that they had complete confidence in her abilities as both a SEAL candidate and a leader. The final phase of specialized training focused on team integration and advanced mission planning. Sarah worked with the same group of candidates who had survived the entire program, and they functioned as a unit preparing for actual deployment. The scenarios became more realistic and complex, multi-day operations that required sustained performance under stress, missions with multiple objectives, and constantly changing parameters. Exercises designed to simulate the uncertainty and danger of real combat situations. Through it all, Sarah continued to prove that her presence made the team stronger rather than weaker. Her analytical skills helped with mission planning. Her attention to detail prevented mistakes that could have compromised operations. Her determination inspired teammates when morale was low. As graduation approached, Sarah realized that she had accomplished something that many people had believed was impossible. She had not only survived Navy SEAL training but had excelled in ways that earned the respect of instructors and fellow candidates who had initially doubted her capabilities. But the greatest test was still ahead. Graduating from training was only the beginning. Sarah was about to face her first real-world mission as a Navy SEAL, and nothing in training could fully prepare her for what she would encounter when the bullets were real and failure could mean death for her entire team. The mission briefing took place in a secure facility that Sarah had never seen before. Maps covered every wall, and intelligence reports filled several tables. The target was a compound in a hostile region where enemy forces had been holding American prisoners for over 6 months. Previous rescue attempts had failed. Traditional military approaches had been unsuccessful due to the terrain and the enemy's defensive positions. The compound was built into a mountainside with only one apparent access route that was heavily fortified and constantly monitored. Sarah's team consisted of 6 SEALs, each with specialized skills that would be essential for mission success. The team leader was Commander James Mitchell, a veteran with over 15 years of SEAL experience who had initially been skeptical about working with a female operator. The intelligence reports painted a grim picture. The prisoners were being held in underground cells that could only be accessed through the main compound. Enemy forces numbered approximately 30 combat-trained soldiers with heavy weapons and defensive positions that covered all approach routes. What made this mission particularly challenging was the timeline. Intelligence sources indicated that the prisoners would be moved to a more secure location within 72 hours. This rescue attempt was the last opportunity to save them before they disappeared completely. Sarah studied the terrain maps and reconnaissance photos while the team developed their operational plan. The compound's location seemed to make a traditional assault impossible. The mountainside approach would expose them to enemy fire for over a mile. The valley approach would require crossing open ground with no cover. But Sarah noticed something that others had missed. The reconnaissance photos showed water damage on the back wall of the compound, suggesting an underground water source. Cross-referencing geological surveys revealed a cave system that ran beneath the mountain and connected to natural springs near the compound. Her suggestion changed everything. Instead of approaching the compound from ground level where they would face the strongest defenses, they could potentially access the target from below. The cave system would allow them to bypass most of the enemy's defensive positions and reach the compound undetected. Commander Mitchell was initially skeptical. The cave approach would be dangerous and unpredictable. They would be operating in an environment where their training and equipment might not be sufficient. If something went wrong underground, rescue would be impossible. But Sarah had done her homework. She had identified multiple exit points from the cave system and calculated travel times that would allow them to complete the mission within their operational window. More importantly, she had developed contingency plans for the most likely failure scenarios. After 12 hours of planning and preparation, the team deployed to their insertion point 2 miles from the target compound. They would approach the cave entrance under cover of darkness and begin the underground portion of their mission before dawn. The cave entrance was smaller than expected, requiring them to crawl through openings that barely accommodated their equipment. Sarah went first, using climbing techniques she had perfected during training to navigate passages that twisted and turned through solid rock. The underground journey took 4 hours instead of the planned 2. The cave system was more complex than their maps had indicated, with multiple branches and dead ends that forced them to backtrack and find alternative routes. At one point, they had to navigate a water-filled passage that required them to hold their breath for over 2 minutes while pulling their equipment behind them. Sarah's navigation skills proved essential during this phase. Using techniques she had learned during underwater training, she maintained their direction and progress even when landmarks became impossible to identify. Her teammates later acknowledged that they would have become lost without her guidance. When they finally reached the cave opening beneath the compound, they discovered that their intelligence had been partially correct. There was access to the compound's foundation, but it was through a drainage system that had not appeared on any of their maps. The drainage pipes were barely large enough for a person to crawl through, and they extended for over 50 yards before reaching the compound's basement level. Worse, the pipes were partially filled with water that made movement slow and noisy. Sarah volunteered to go first again, testing each section of the drainage system for structural integrity and enemy detection before signaling her teammates to follow. The journey through the pipes took over an hour and left them soaked and exhausted before their mission had even begun. When they reached the compound's basement, Sarah found herself in a storage area filled with supplies and equipment. More importantly, she could hear voices and movement from the levels above, confirming that the compound was actively occupied. Using hand signals, she communicated her observations to her teammates as they emerged from the drainage system. They were inside the target compound, but they still had to locate the prisoners, neutralize the guards, and extract safely without alerting the larger enemy force. The compound's layout was different from their intelligence reports. The basement level was larger and more complex than expected, with multiple rooms and corridors that created opportunities for both concealment and confusion. Sarah and her teammates had to modify their plan in real time while maintaining absolute silence. Working in pairs, they systematically searched the basement level for the prisoner holding areas. Sarah partnered with Sergeant Rodriguez, a demolitions expert who would be responsible for creating their exit route if the drainage system became compromised. They found the first prisoner in a cell that was hidden behind what appeared to be a supply closet. The prisoner was an Army intelligence officer who had been captured 4 months earlier during a reconnaissance mission. He was weak from poor nutrition and limited medical care, but he was conscious and able to communicate. The intelligence officer provided crucial information about the compound's layout and the location of other prisoners. There were 3 additional captives being held on the basement level, and all were in similar physical condition. More importantly, he warned them about a guard rotation that would bring enemy soldiers to the basement level within 30 minutes. Sarah and her teammates had to accelerate their timeline while maintaining operational security. They located and secured the remaining 3 prisoners while setting up defensive positions that would allow them to control access to the basement if their presence was discovered. The prisoners included 2 Marines and a Navy pilot whose aircraft had been shot down during a supply mission. All 3 had been interrogated extensively, but had maintained operational security and provided no classified information to their captors. As they prepared for extraction, Sarah realized that their original exit plan would not work. The prisoners were too weak to navigate the drainage system and cave passages that had brought the SEAL team to the compound. They needed an alternative extraction method that could accommodate 4 injured Americans. Working quickly, Sarah and Sergeant Rodriguez developed a new plan that involved creating an explosive exit through the compound's back wall. The explosion would alert enemy forces, but it would also create a direct escape route to the extraction point where helicopter support was waiting. The timing had to be perfect. They needed to move all 4 prisoners to the proposed exit point, prepare the explosive charges, and coordinate with their air support before enemy reinforcements could respond to their presence. Sarah took responsibility for preparing the prisoners for movement while her teammates set up defensive positions and prepared the explosive charges. The prisoners needed medical attention and psychological preparation for what would be an intense and dangerous evacuation. When everything was ready, Sarah gave the signal for detonation. The explosive charges created a hole in the compound's back wall large enough for rapid movement, while also serving as a distraction that drew enemy attention away from their actual exit route. The extraction was chaotic, but successful. Enemy forces responded quickly to the explosion, but the SEAL team had anticipated their reaction and positioned themselves to control the engagement. Sarah found herself in direct combat with enemy soldiers who were trying to prevent their escape. Using cover provided by the explosion damage, She engaged multiple targets while coordinating the movement of prisoners who could barely walk. Her marksmanship training proved essential as she neutralized threats while avoiding shots that could endanger the rescued Americans. The helicopter extraction took place under heavy enemy fire, but all 4 prisoners and all 6 SEALs reached the aircraft safely. As they lifted off from the compound area, Sarah could see enemy forces converging on their former position, confirming that their timing had been crucial to mission success. During the flight back to their base, Commander Mitchell approached Sarah and acknowledged what everyone on the team already knew. Her navigation skills had made the underground approach possible. Her analytical abilities had identified the cave system that provided access to the target. Her adaptability had enabled them to modify their plan when circumstances changed. Most importantly, her performance under fire had proven that Navy SEALs succeeded based on competence and determination rather than gender or physical size. She had earned her place on the team through performance that met the same standards applied to every SEAL who had preceded her. The mission was classified at the highest levels, so Sarah's achievement would never be publicly acknowledged. But within the SEAL community, word spread quickly about the first female operator who had not only completed the training but had proven herself in combat. Sarah Martinez had broken a barrier that many people believed would never be broken. She had proven that Navy SEALs succeeded because of mental toughness, technical skill, and unwavering determination rather than traditional assumptions about gender roles in combat. More importantly, she had demonstrated that when lives were at stake and missions needed to be completed, the only thing that mattered was competence and dedication to the team. Her gender had become irrelevant in the face of her ability to perform at the highest level when performance was the difference between life and death. The rescued prisoners recovered fully from their ordeal and returned to active duty. The compound was destroyed in follow-up operations that prevented its use for future hostage situations. And Sarah Martinez continued her career as a Navy SEAL, participating in missions that would remain classified but that contributed to national security in ways that few Americans would ever fully understand. Her story became an inspiration for other women considering military careers and combat roles, proving that barriers existed to be broken by individuals willing to meet the same standards required of everyone else. Sarah had shown that Navy SEALs didn't need special accommodations or lowered standards. They just needed the opportunity to prove what they could accomplish when given the chance.